water swarm with living things, and let birds fly above the earth up in the dome of the sky. God created the great sea animals and all the tiny living things that swarm in the waters, each according to its kind, and all the winged birds, each according to its kind. God saw how good it was. Then God blessed them. Be fertile and multiply and fill the waters in the sea, and let the birds multiply on the earth. There was evening and there was morning, the fifth day. God said, let the earth produce every kind of a living thing, livestock, crawling things, and wildlife. And that's what happened. God made every kind of wildlife, every kind of livestock, and every kind of creature that crawls on the ground. God saw how good it was.
I don't remember exactly when or how I first fell in love with nature. It may have been on one of the many, many family camping trips in the desert. Certainly, that's how I developed my love for beautiful rocks and minerals, because to my mother's consternation, I was always bringing home a pie pan full of rocks from every camping trip as a child. Or it may have been through my involvement in Girl Scouting, those camping trips in the mountains, canoeing down the Colorado River, sailing on Mission Bay. Whenever or however it was that I fell in love with nature, I do know that by the time I got to 8th grade and had to write an essay about the most beautiful sound in the world, I wrote about the rushing sound of the wind in the pine trees. And I've come to believe that being in love with nature is one of the most important, most foundational aspects of my life. Being in love with nature shaped me and influenced who I became. Because I was in love with nature, I developed an urgent need to care for the earth, a need that would annoy my roommates as a young adult when I insisted on recycling orthodoxy. Because I was in love with nature, I developed a consistent practice of experiencing awe and wonder and astonishment. Scientists tell us that the experience of awe and wonder are important to our well-being. In studies done through the Greater Good Science Center at UC Berkeley, those who regularly have feelings of awe and wonder have fewer inflammation markers in their bodies, something that has a direct influence upon their health and life expectancy. Being in love with nature influences my physical well-being. Finally, I believe that because I am in love with nature, the awe and wonder and astonishment that I feel whenever I contemplate its beauty brings me into closer connection with the divine. Now, this connection between nature and divinity is not a new idea at all. In the 6th century, the theologian that we know as Pseudo-Dionysius wrote, "The divine is, as it were, beguiled by beauty, goodness, eros, agape, enticed from its transcendent dwelling place to abide within all things." In other words, divine goodness fell in love with creation and so was compelled to bring it into being, as the theologian Wendy Farley suggests. The zeal and love of God for creation is manifest in the beauty of beings, which are themselves expressions of divine beauty. This connection between divine goodness and the beauty of creation is intimated in our scripture reading from Genesis. As God creates all the beautiful creatures of the earth, the great sea animals and all the tiny living things that swarm in the waters and all the winged birds and every kind of living thing, livestock, crawling things, and wildlife, God beholds it and declares that it is good. Wendy Farley suggests that when we contemplate the beauty of creation, we begin to perceive creation the way God does. we begin to see how creation is interdependent and how we are intricately intertwined with the natural world. When we fall in love or become beguiled, as the divine was, with the beauty of creation, we begin to realize the link between the human spirit and the divine goodness. Today, we're beginning a new worship series, one that we're calling Beguiled by Creation. From September 1st, which is World Day of Prayer for Creation, to October 4th, which is the feast day of St. Francis, each year, members of denominations across the Christian community and around the globe celebrate the season of creation by praying and acting together to protect our common home. For the past few years, our congregation has marked this season with a worship series, and we are doing that again this year. Last month, the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change released the 6th assessment report on climate change. The authors of the report conclude that it is unequivocal that humans have warmed the planet, causing widespread and rapid changes to Earth's oceans, ice, and land surface. They warn that the present state of many parts of the climate system is unprecedented over many centuries to many thousands of years. And as Pastor Jeff said in his article in our September newsletter, the urgency of protecting our common home has never been clearer. We both hope that our congregation will continue to deepen our commitment to greening our church and reducing our carbon footprint. And we hope that individuals in our community will make commitments to do the same. Many of you have done just that with our Green Challenge this summer. Beyond reducing our carbon footprint, Pastor Jeff and I think that we as Christians can bring something special to that urgent struggle, the why of protecting our common home. And we're going to focus on that why during this series, hoping that we will all fall in love with nature again. Being in love with nature is also not a new idea, and it's one that scientists have actually explored in recent decades. The biologist E.O. Wilson speculated that humans have an innate affiliation with nature because we spent so much time closely connected to it during our evolution. Wilson called this the biophilia hypothesis, and suggested that an attraction to nature may even be wired into our genes. Recent studies about what interacting with the natural world does for our physical, mental, and emotional well-being may well point to this conclusion. As noted by a recent article by writer Lucy Jones, the author of Losing Eden: Why Our Minds Need the Wild, studies suggest that when we are in natural areas, our parasympathetic nervous system is more likely to be activated. This functions to slow the heart. It helps us feel calm, and it's associated with better sleep and feelings of contentment and safety. Another study found that people under anesthesia produced fewer chemical biomarkers associated with stress when played a recording of soft wind or birdsong. Amazingly, the sounds of nature had a measurable physiological impact even when people weren't conscious. And yet another area of research has to do with petrichor, that delicious smell of the earth after it's rained, when oil from soil and plants is released into the air. Did you realize there was a word for that smell? There is. A paper by a team in South Korea found that when a study group smelled petrichor, it triggered brain activity linked with calmness and relaxation. When we fall in love with nature, it's a multisensory experience. I'm going to conclude today with two pieces of art from folks who are also beguiled by creation, people who have fallen in love with nature and who have allowed that love to flourish into a calling. The first is a poem from one of my favorite poets, Mary Oliver. Hear how being beguiled by creation is what she thinks of as her work in the world. This is the poem Messenger. My work is loving the world. Here the sunflowers, there the hummingbird, equal seekers of sweetness. Here the quickening yeast, there the blue plums. Here the clam, deep in the speckled sand. Are my boots old? Is my coat torn? Am I no longer young and still half perfect? Well, let me keep my mind on what matters, which is my work, which is mostly standing still and learning to be astonished. The phoebe, the delphinium, the sheep in the pasture, and the pasture, which is mostly rejoicing since all the ingredients are here, which is gratitude to be given a mind and a heart and these body clothes, a mouth with which to give shouts of joy to the moth and the wren, to the sleepy dug up clam, telling them all over and over how it is that we live forever. And the second piece is a lovely short film created by the SALT Project, a small media production company with a focus on spirituality. I hope that you'll find this Emmy-winning 5-minute film about birds beguiling. May it invite you into a deeper connection with the natural world and a deeper connection with divine goodness. Amen.
Hi, I'm Eric Masterson. I grew up in Ireland, and that was where I first discovered the magic of birds. I traveled the world long before I ever left Dublin. I grew up in a pretty gritty part of the country. Dublin's a gritty town. I can remember in May, common swifts. I remember vividly common swifts would appear outside my bedroom window. And I'd go to my globe. I had an inflatable globe, and I would get my field guide, and I would learn that they would spend the winter in the jungles of Africa, the savannas of Africa, and here they were outside my bedroom window. I remember the wheat ears that would pass through on their way to Greenland. I would go with them, at least my mind would go with them, armed with just a field guide, an inflatable globe, and my child's imagination. So later I would emigrate from Ireland to the US myself. My wife and I moved to southwest New Hampshire. But the birds didn't come with us, obviously. Europe's birds migrate north-south, as do North America's birds, and so I had to learn a whole new cast of characters. But the journeys are just as remarkable. I was on a boat out in the Gulf of Maine, 80 miles offshore, and a flock of 70 golden plovers flew over the bow of the boat. And I watched them for maybe, I couldn't have been more than 2 minutes. And they came into my field of view from the left, and they exited my field of view to the right. And I know these birds. I had read up on their life history. They travel out over the Atlantic non-stop in one continuous flight until they reach land in South America. I was just blown away. I was watching 2 minutes of what has to be one of the most incredible journeys in the world. And it's like a Rorschach test. I think some people might just see a flock of birds, and I felt like I was looking at 2 minutes of just one of the most incredible journeys imaginable. But more often than not, we don't get to see the journey like the golden plovers. We just see its aftermath. I'll be standing at my kitchen window with my coffee in the morning, and I'll look out and I'll see the first aureole of the spring, May 13th, for instance. And I know it wasn't here on May 12th, but it's here on May 13th. And so what I'm seeing is the arrival, and I'm missing this incredible journey that came before that. It's like, I think of visiting Portland, Oregon, to experience the Lewis and Clark expedition. You just can't do it that way. But the real mystery of it is most birds don't travel during the day. Most of them migrate at night to avoid hawks, to use the stars as navigation. Occasionally, on a really busy night, if you use a telescope, you can see one flying across the face of the moon. On good nights, migration will even show up on Doppler radar, but really you don't get to see it, and so you have to learn to see with your ears. On really active nights, step outside your house and cup your hands to your ears and put your face to the skies, and you can hear them as they pass overhead, calling to each other. Scientists don't really know why they do this. Perhaps it's to help them avoid mid-air collisions, like some sort of air traffic control for birds. My yard in New Hampshire is 3 acres of pretty ordinary forest, and yet I've recorded more than 150 species of birds. Really quite incredible. Many of them just spectrograms in the night, and a spectrogram is a visual representation of the bird's call note, like sheet music. I have a collection of these spectrograms. It's honestly like a guest book of these visitors that come to my yard. They don't touch down, they just fly over. Nighttime is a time for dreaming, and as I lay asleep in bed and my recorder is on throughout the night, these birds, hundreds, thousands, millions of them across the continent, passing south over my house, over your house, and they're traveling thousands of miles to faraway lands using the stars as a guide. I wish I had the imagination to dream such an incredible dream. And then I check my voicemails in the morning and I hear these call notes left by these international travelers. And that dream is real.